Tired of pretending to be someone you're not? Maybe it's time to live like a madman who saw the truth. Diogenes stood in front of a brothel, shouting like a man possessed. A beautiful prostitute is like poisoned honey. A beautiful prostitute is like poisoned honey. The men passing by, irritated and embarrassed, threw him a few coins, just to make him shut up. Once he had enough, Diogenes pocketed the coins, and walked straight into the brothel himself. That was Diogenes. Brash, unapologetic, wildly unconventional. One day, someone mocked him, asking, "If you're a teacher, why do you beg like a fool?" He looked them straight in the eye and replied, "I teach generosity, that's why." To many, especially to Plato, Diogenes was no more than a street dog. "Truly, you live up to your name," Plato scoffed one day. Diogenes grinned, bared his teeth. "You're right for once, Plato," he said, "but at least I have sunk my teeth into philosophy." Born in 412 BC, in a Greek city called Cynic, Diogenes later became known as the Cynic, and for good reason. He rejected everything society stood for: money, fame, social status, even the comforts of home. He owned almost nothing. Some say he lived in a barrel. But what he truly lived in was freedom. He stripped life down to its rawest form. And with that, he revealed how little we actually need to be at peace. Many called him mad, but perhaps he was simply more awake than the rest. Diogenes didn't just talk about philosophy. He lived it, loudly. He openly mocked the greats of his time. Even Plato wasn't safe. He refused to play along with society's shallow games, and instead, provoked people to confront the lies they'd been living. He asked bold questions. What is virtue? What is happiness? Are we chasing truth, or just comfort? He wasn't a hermit hiding from pain, he embraced it. In winter, Diogenes would walk barefoot on the snow. In the scorching summer, he'd roll himself in hot sand. His goal? To toughen his mind through the suffering of the body. One of his followers, concerned, asked, "Aren't you overdoing it?" With a smirk, Diogenes said, "I have to shout louder than the choir, if I want to teach the right tune." Then, there's the tale of the fig tree. Diogenes was collecting fruit when a man warned him, "Don't eat those. Someone hanged himself from that tree." Without flinching, Diogenes took a fig, bit deep, and sucked on it like drawing venom from a wound. Then let it be purified. He said, he didn't live to please others. He lived to challenge them. And in doing so, he left behind more than a legacy. He left behind a mirror for us to look into, and question what we think we know about life. The man just stood there, stunned, as Diogenes turned his back and walked away, calm, unshaken. This was the kind of presence Diogenes carried. Not loud with power, but loud with principle. Someone once asked him, "What's the difference between life and death?" He shrugged. "There is no difference," he said. "Then why stay alive?" Diogenes smiled. "Because there is no difference." When Diogenes begged on the streets, people often spat at him. He never shouted, never cursed. He just wiped his face with his sleeve and kept going. Someone mocked him for putting up with it. He looked back and said, "If sailors can get soaked by waves just to catch a small fish, shouldn't I bear a few drops for my dinner?" That's the kind of logic that cuts deeper than insult. One day, a man in the crowd shouted, "I don't care about philosophy. My mind isn't built for this nonsense." Without hesitation, Diogenes fired back, "Then why live at all? If living well means nothing to you, what are you holding on to?" When some foreign travelers came to Athens, they asked Diogenes, "Can you show us the great philosopher Plato?" He nodded, walked them through winding streets, until they reached the loneliest, most desolate corner of the city. Then, gesturing into thin air with mock elegance, he said, "There he is, the great Plato." No one knew if he was joking or being profound. With Diogenes, it was often both. Most people who followed him couldn't last. His way of life, bare bones, raw, and radical, wasn't for the faint of heart. One disciple gave up and decided to leave. Before going, he asked Diogenes for one of his books. Diogenes laughed and said, "You fool. You wouldn't eat a painting of figs instead of real ones. Yet you're willing to read about wisdom instead of living it." That hit hard. Another time, someone questioned him, "Why do you accept money? Just to teach people how to spend their money?" Diogenes answered flatly, "Because they clearly need to be taught." Simple, brutal, true. There's also the moment he walked into a theater. Not during the show, but right after it ended. Just as the crowd was pouring out, he calmly walked in. "Why now?" someone asked. "Because going against the crowd," he said, "is what I've always done." Even his poverty had purpose. Someone once asked him, "Why are you so poor?" And Diogenes replied, with a grin, "Because I worked too much." And with that, Diogenes reminds us, sometimes the richest truths come from the poorest mouths. But his lessons weren't meant to be read in books. They were meant to be lived. And as we peel back more layers of this strange, stubborn sage, we'll begin to see how his madness was just another form of clarity. Someone once asked Diogenes, "What advice would you give the rich?" He didn't even blink. "Avoid all the so-called good things in life." "Why?" they pressed. "Because money costs too much." He paused, then added, "A rich man is poorer than a poor one. Because poverty is the only thing money can't buy." Then there was the time a famous athlete returned from war. Celebrated, praised, draped in glory. As he rode through the cheering crowd, he couldn't take his eyes off the women. Diogenes, watching from a distance, muttered, "Look at our brave hero. Defeated by every girl he sees." One morning, as the sun lit the city in gold, Diogenes walked through the crowded market. But he wasn't shopping. He held up a lantern, glowing bright. Even in daylight, he walked slowly, eyes searching. Someone asked, "What are you doing?" He replied, "I'm looking for an honest man." He scanned their faces one by one, then sighed, shook his head, and walked away. "I called for men," he said, "but all I found were shadows." Another time, during a serious philosophical debate at Cranium, Diogenes noticed no one was paying attention. So, without warning, he stood up and began whistling and dancing like a madman. The crowd turned. All eyes were now on him. He stopped abruptly and said, "Fools, you ignore wisdom, but run to watch a clown." One afternoon, he was washing vegetables in a stream, when Plato strolled by and couldn't help but mock him. "If you knew how to flatter kings," Plato said, "you wouldn't be washing vegetables." Diogenes looked up, smiled, and replied, "If you knew how to wash vegetables, you wouldn't need to flatter kings." And then, a moment of quiet humility. Diogenes saw a young boy kneel by a stream, cupping water in his bare hands to drink. Diogenes watched, stunned. He looked at the cup he'd carried with him for years, and tossed it away. "This child," he said, "has outdone me in simplicity." And perhaps that was the heart of his philosophy. Not rebellion for the sake of rebellion, but the pursuit of truth, stripped bare. The kind of truth that doesn't come from books, but from living with less and seeing with more. But Diogenes didn't stop there. One day, a young man approached him. Curious, nervous, hopeful, he asked for advice about marriage. And Diogenes, ever the provocateur, had something unforgettable to say. "Should I get married?" a young man once asked Diogenes. Diogenes thought for a moment, then replied, "Marriage is too early for a young man." The boy frowned. "Then should I wait until I'm older?" "It's too late for an old man." "But I love her," he insisted. Diogenes raised an eyebrow. "Love is a luxury," he said. "It's for those who have nothing better to do." The young man pressed on. "Then what should we do?" "Seek freedom," he protested. "But having a wife and children isn't bad." Diogenes looked at him and said quietly, "Exactly. That's the problem. Freedom would be easy to reach if the prison weren't so sweet." "So you're saying, to be free, we must be alone?" "We're born alone. We die alone. Why live any differently?" "That sounds terrible." Diogenes leaned in. "Not living. Living in chains." One day, someone asked him, "Tell me, Diogenes, what does a wise man look like?" Without a word, he stood up tall and stroked his beard. When asked about his worst nightmare, he replied, "Waking up in a palace, while everyone else still lives in barrels." Another time, Diogenes walked backward through the agora, completely unfazed by the stares and laughter. When a crowd had gathered, he stopped and turned to face them. "You laugh because I walk backward for a moment," he said, "yet you spend your whole lives upside down." Then, without drama or anger, he simply turned forward and walked away. Looking back through time, Diogenes still stands like a flame in the wind. Wild, unshaken, untamed, he mocked comfort, challenged pride, and exposed the illusions we often call success. But beneath all his provocations was a message that still matters today. Be free, be honest, live simply, and don't be afraid to question everything, especially yourself. Diogenes didn't leave behind an empire. He left behind a mirror. And if we're willing to look into it, we might just see a version of ourselves that's a little braver, a little lighter, and a little more true. So as we move through our own noisy, complicated world, let's carry a bit of Diogenes with us. Let's dare to live with less, to question more, and to find freedom not in what we gain, but in what we can let go. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the life and defiant wisdom of Diogenes the Cynic. If his voice stirred something in you, a spark, a question, or a challenge, then you're already on the path. Stick with us. There's so much more ahead. This is just one chapter in our Stoic journey. Sparkles, subscribe to the channel. Like the video if it spoke to you. And come back for more stories, more wisdom, and more moments of truth.